Hello, everybody, and welcome back to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Building a Learning Culture for Organizational Success, sponsored by Allego, Canvas, Udemy Business, and ROI Training. So again, I am Liz Spade, the Events Marketing Specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us all here today. Again, before we get started, though, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. And as mentioned in the chat, it has been such great conversations and questions, so let's keep that going. So as always, plug those questions and comments in the chat. For this session in particular, we will be addressing those questions at the end of the presentation, but please do not hesitate to plug those questions throughout. And once this session ends, a brief survey will appear in your browser. Please take a moment to share feedback on the session and the speaker. Let us know all the details. And then all of our sessions are being recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com. And so for Jessica, yes, you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions, and you will get that end of day, I promise. And if this is your first training industry event, we would love to welcome you. We exist to make connections among learning and development professionals, and we offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D, like live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, and our podcast. We would also love to hear about what you learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platforms so we can continue the conversation. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our third speaker of the day. Dr. Tom Whelan is the Director of Corporate Research at Training Industry, and where for the past decade, he has been researching learner, learning leader, and market level questions that affect modern organizations. So with that, Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. Let me get my screen going. All right, hopefully it was that simple. All right, looks like it's working. Okay, so welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of day it is for you. I hope it's just good. The title of today's session is Content Under Pressure: Sustaining a Learning Culture in Times of Change. And after watching the previous two sessions, I'm excited to talk to y'all because I think luckily nobody's tried to cover the same ground I have. I mean, so we've heard a little bit about um, how change in culture works with sales in the first session. Last session we heard kind of about how leaders interact with a lot of this. So here we're going to take more of a let's try to hug the whole enterprise sort of angle on things. Oh, I got to be in the right place. Okay, so for the agenda of what we're going to go down today, first we're going to define or redefine, as it may be, what learning culture is and what the component parts of it are. Then we're going to talk about some of the barriers to culture based on some data from research that training industry has done. Then the real meat of this, we're going to talk about the intersection of change and culture and what our data shows and what conclusions we can draw about what happens when you try to smash these two cars together. What do you get? What tends to be important? What tends to not be important? And then hopefully, if I manage all my time correctly, at the end we'll have some time for Q&A after we hopefully wrap everything up and I'll walk away happy. All right, so with that, let's get into the first section on redefining learning culture and just kind of like what is this? So we've been talking about it for this is the third session now, but really, what is it when we get into it? And I wanted to start by giving you what we have at Training Industry in our glossary, how we define it. So put very simply, learning culture is defined by the organizational practices, values, and processes that shape and support basically how training works more or less. Note, however, though, and I think this is very, very important in trying to define what this is, and I mean the words we use matter. This definition is not aspirational, right? It's reflective. Like, so what are your actual practices? What are your lived values? What is the experience of your processes, right? In learning culture, there's a truth. It's usually not as sunshiny as we'd like it to be, but there is a truth of what is the culture, and there is a desired future state for what the culture might be, or what it could be, or what we would like it to be. And we can't really afford to muddle the line between those two things, right? So yes, though we may have a picture of what we'd like our learning culture to be, we don't want to fall prey to chasing the mirage, thinking that we're already there just because that's what we're trying to move towards, right? We have to address culture as it is, reflective of where we're at, Um, Not necessarily just all based on where we think we're going, right? Because the rest of this definition, it being defined by practices and values and stuff, is that when it's done well, the goal is to promote continuous growth of employees, and enhance their individual performance and drive organizational success, all the kind of follow-on effects you would expect. Um, and that the purpose of the culture is to engage employees in both individual and collaborative learning efforts, right? So they feel empowered, they help shape the organization's future, all that kind of stuff. So that is what it's supposed to do. But the culture that we have, like the shoes we wore today, is defined by what are our processes right now, what are our values right now, to the extent that they're communicated and everybody understands them as the same thing, and just how are we going about training, right? That defines the culture that we're living in. Now it's nice to talk about it in the abstract, but let's actually say, what are some of the components of these things? And so for that, I'm taking a definition of training climate, and I know that's not the same thing as culture. We'll get there. But I'm taking a definition of climate from two researchers named Tracy and Tooze. They published this in 2005 in Organizational Research Methods, following like a decade of development. And the fact that they did all that isn't really as important as how they did it. So rather than start with an idea, to just throw darts at a board and be like, oh, this seems like this is important, let's run after that. They let the data tell them. So their components, their framework are basically empirically based. Like, it's they emerged from the numbers rather than, they had this thing they were expecting to find, and they just rooted around until the numbers looked like they confirmed what they thought. Um, but in their framework, there are three components. So the first one is managerial support. So this refers to, how do supervisors and managers influence the learning environment? Do leaders promote learning or not? Do they encourage innovation and training? Do they recognize employee development? So are they directly kind of most proximal to the learner? Are they creating a kind of local culture where professional growth is valued? Right? So that's one of the three important table legs. The next one is job support. So this is the role structured to support ongoing learning? Is the job designed to be flexible, allow room for skill development, allow the employee to maybe experiment with some tasks? Sorry. Uh, so that way it's not just facilitating learning, but encouraging employees to try to apply new skills, to look for better ways to do things. Because you can have a manager that supports training, and the job is not at all conducive to somebody trying to do all these things and play in a sandbox. And then the third table leg is organizational support. So this is all the broader systems and policies that reinforce the value of training. Um, so this is performance evaluations. This is the reward systems the organization has in place, the types of resources they have, how easy those resources are to access. Um, so again, you know, not the most important thing, like the job or the role and the manager support doesn't exist. Organizational support is still very important, because without it, without incentivizing learners to the parent organization, without holding them accountable, I mean, what do you expect people to do in training? Are they you think they're going to apply what they've learned? You think they're going to continue to develop their skills if the message that they're getting from the organization doesn't value any of that? So these three things together are what these researchers say basically forms the training climate for a person. And climate can be thought of as the kind of quote unquote what's actually happening, which when you put that on a loop and add in the learner experience, that's what you get for the experience of culture. Right? Because this, like, we're not talking about something that's static, that you can take a picture of it and be like, this is our learning culture in December 2025. That's what it is. This definition of it is valid for all of next year. It's probably not even valid for all the employees. Based on these three kind of types of support, based on the experiences that the learner has, whatever modalities that might be, whatever the topic might be. There's a lot of things that move around the lived experience of what the learning culture is inside the organization. Um, and if we think about it, all three of them are important, but one of them going wrong can usurp the other two. So say you have a manager that is gung-ho about individual development for everybody on their team. They support training, they value it, they try to, yell at their employees, put time on your calendar for training. They're behind it. Awesome. Maybe the role is set up such that the employee has or can afford the time to take out of their daily work tasks, and engage with learning, or just in the flow of their daily work tasks, they have the freedom and the wherewithal to maybe stop for 5 minutes and go, let me go make sure I know what I'm doing here and just reference something. Um, so you can have those two things in place, but if the broader organization really doesn't care, then like, yes, it's nice that you have a manager that's supported. Yes, it's nice that the role is conducive to it. But if the organization doesn't value it, if the incentives aren't there, if there is no carrot at the end of the stick, how do you expect motion to happen? So it's really these three things kind of interlocking together. And you can think of them, I mean, the organizational support is kind of the same for all employees. It might be understood differently, but otherwise kind of blanket applies to everyone the same. But the role that can change wildly across the organization. Obviously, the manager is going to change as soon as you go from team to team. A sales manager, like we were talking about in the first session, might have a very different view, a very different perspective on what's important than the leader that we were talking about in the second session. And both of them could be right, both of them could be dead wrong. But that's kind of the point of all this. It's a little bit more nuanced, um, than something where we can just write one paragraph and be like, this is our culture and this applies equally to everyone. Now, these three things that we've been talking about are sort of the precursors to culture. Now let's talk a little bit about the impacts. So this is based on data that I collected earlier this year. And what we did here is we were asking people their agreement, to these statements about the impact of the learning culture that they have with their organization. Does it impact the employees? Does it impact the organization or the whole enterprise? And here on the screen, I pulled out the ones that just focus on the employee. And mind you, here we're not looking at like the full response scale. There was neutral responses in the middle. So if for anybody that worries that these don't math out to 100, it's on purpose. The point I wanted to make is the levels of agreement, that learning leaders have with these statements. So when we ask them, you know, does your learning culture have these impacts? Do employees feel that learning programs gives them options? Do they feel understood by the people administering the training? Do they feel like they can speak up and ask questions? I mean, this data says the majority of times, yes. I mean, it's the majority in every one of these cases, but I mean, it's still maybe not as pronounced of a level of agreement as you might expect. I mean, just take the first one on the left. The idea that in only half of organizations do employees feel that they have choices and options in the programs that they engage with. I mean, it's not bad, but like just 51% agree with that. Like what is the training like at the other 49% of organizations? I mean, we know for 25% of them it's just awful. But what's going on with that other quarter that's kind of left out in the cold? Um, so now all that said, though, what we're seeing though is that a culture does have impacts. It affects employees' likelihood to ask questions, to engage with things. When we flip to the organization, again, we see more or less an agreement by the majority of organizations here. Um, but it's still not everybody. So does the organization convey confidence in employees' ability to do well? It's like, yeah, two-thirds of organizations, but it's still not everyone. So there is still lots of room for improvement. And this will also get us to a point that I'm going to make in the next section. But all of this, kind of the antecedents, the consequences of what culture is with these different types of supports, with the learned experience, that's sort of the point of what is this thing that we've been talking about for, at this point going on 3 hours. Culture is more than just training. It's the experience of being a learner at that organization. What does that feel like? What does that look like? What do people have access to? What are the vibes off, as the kids might say? How is learning supported? Is it being supported by managers? Is it being, are the roles kind of leading into that? Does the enterprise embrace learning or not? Or is it kind of indifferent? And then, third, what are the impacts? How is this culture impacting employees? How is it impacting the organization? How is it impacting the relationship the employees have with the organization? All of these questions are learning culture questions. It's not just one of these things by itself. It's all of this stuff. So that now brings us into the second section. What are the barriers to this? And I kind of wanted to start here because I think for a lot of us, culture is a four-letter word. I mean, we don't maybe really treat it like that. We're not afraid to say it. But but you hear stuff about learning culture, and some of us are excited, and others of us are like, oh, what are we going to get now? Um, but but it does kind of bear out that why is it so hard for so many organizations? Like what are the stakes for all this? And to me, it's like kind of what are the stakes? Learning is no longer optional for organizations, right? It's a strategic differentiator at this point. Yet we face persistent barriers that slow progress. It's all the challenges that we're going to get to in a slide. Um, and I think part of the reason that it's so hard is because kind of like we discussed in the last section, it involves so many things. Like it's not simple to define, it's not simple to really attack, right? So just offering courses doesn't really do anything to build a learning culture, right? Building flashy dashboards that's not building a learning culture by itself. Resigning ourselves to some problems like low engagement or bad programs or whatever are never going to get better sure as heck isn't building culture in any way. So if it is so crucial for growth, why do we struggle with it? Why do we face so many barriers and hurdles when we're trying to change it or even just get our thumbs on where is it right now? Um, and to hopefully speak to some of that, we're going to spend at least a minute or two here on this chart. So this is data from the 300 and I think it was 66 learning leaders. I mean, we're looking at the state of the whole presentation. Um, but when we asked, a couple hundred learning leaders, what are the challenges that you experience most commonly when it comes to your culture? This what we're looking at is what they told us. So number one, kind of like we heard in the first session, is facilitating engagement with training. That's the number one challenge, right? So it's about participation, it's about motivation to learn, over and above just having access to training. Like that is one or the biggest challenge that we have to culture. And one of the reasons that I think we have that challenge is because or not, I was going to say we, like I'm including everybody. I know it's not everybody, but too many organizations, um, when they feel they need to do something with training, they look at the supply side of things, as in supplying more content. Oh, we have a need for this skill or we have a need for this knowledge area. What do we have that can serve that? So it's all just pushing stuff out rather than focusing on the demand side of learning to try to reduce friction. So rather than saying like, do we have a training or several trainings on whatever topic, rather than ask, do we have relevant training on that topic? Are managers reinforcing this training? Do we, if this one topic is so important, do we have it offered in multiple formats? So, again, harkening back a few slides, for people in different roles, depending on their opportunity to engage with training, or even just their wherewithal to be able to engage with training in different modalities, like how can we make sure that the learning gets to them? So anything you can do to address the demand side of engagement rather than kind of attacking it from a supply side. I think that's um, one of the biggest challenges to being able to do this effectively. The next challenge is consistency. And to me, this is fascinating because if you look at the very bottom of the, well, not the very bottom, but third up from the very bottom of the chart, the loser of this pageant, as it was scalability. So consistency is the issue here. It's not a matter of like, oh, we need things to be consistent so we can scale it up, so we can roll this training out, to regions and different departments and blah blah blah. That's a scaling it is a separate problem. Only 19% of our sample said like, yeah, that is an issue for us. But 40% of the sample said we just have trouble doing the same thing 2 times in a row. And which is kind of a big deal if you think about it. Like, what culture are you sustaining when the experience is all over the map, right? So the implication here, like, how do we try to address this challenge? To the extent that we can, if we can create like a standardized learning operating model with room for local adaptation. So there's one sheet of music, but everybody's a jazz musician and they can play it a little bit differently. I don't, maybe that's a helpful way to think about it. The third challenge, resources. I mean, that one, it's an oldie but a goodie. It's probably never gonna completely go away for training. I mean, it seems times are good, but we still feel like we have limited resources. Times are bad, we definitely have limited resources. The fourth one down the list is about leadership prioritization. Um, and again, going back to the Tracy and Twos framework, managerial support is crucial to the local climate that kind of drives culture, right? So I think the way to think about it is that managers are a learning multiplier, right? Without visible sponsorship, engagement isn't going to stick, and it cuts just as deep the other direction. So yes, it's about leaders encouraging learners and supporting learning just as much as it's about them not discouraging learners or devaluing learning, or talking bad about whatever the initiative is, right? So like in this sense, like learning goals are the meat to the kind of OKR KPI bread as it were. Like leadership support and prioritization has to be something that they can't afford not to do, rather than something that you're trying to pull them along stubbornly to get on board with. And then if we kind of look at the last cluster of these challenges, they all have to do with sustaining impact or improving evaluation, right? Like a third can't keep the gains that they fight for. Almost as many lack metrics. 28% can't even assess the health of their culture, right? So in this light, it's not shocking that 30% of organizations have trouble aligning training with strategy, right? I mean, in a sense, it's shocking that more aren't screwing it up, or perhaps more frightening, that is absolutely the case, and they're in the dark about how badly they're screwing it up, right? Like, so they're being defeated by an enemy that's invisible to them, that's also hiding in plain sight. So I think the part of the bomb to you know, cure this kind of cluster of challenges is to treat learning as a behavior change program, not a course event. So learning is about long-term behavior change, not we had an event, we had this many learners go through it. Here's what the survey said at the end. We need better sandwiches next time. Maybe they'll like the training more, the second time around. So said another way, like what we need to do is focus on the right endpoints. Like, how does this impact performance? Not how does it impact training satisfaction? One of my favorite unpopular kind of hot takes is that a lot of us think that learners have to enjoy the training to learn stuff from it. And the opposite is most often true. Like the trainings where you get the most out of it, you get the most useful things on the back end, usually aren't classically fun the way we might think of them as fun. I mean, it doesn't mean they're painful or boring. Like the material can be made as fun as possible. But the instances where we learn the most are the instances where things are difficult, where we have to fight with them, where we have to struggle with them, where we get things wrong. Where we feel like there's risk, whether it's actual risk or just social risk. There has to be something on the line. And so to the extent that we can treat training like what we're going after is behavior change, it will it will kind of cue us in to look at the behaviors that actually matter rather than focusing on other outcomes that might not really move the needle. And now let's get to a what I'm going to call a bitter, awkward truth, and kind of why we treat it like a four-letter word. Um, because we have a learning culture, good or bad, whether you want it or not, right? Like, and we know, and maybe even have a sense of where we don't really know, but we suspect what kind of challenges we have to our culture, how deep some of these challenges are cutting. And we know whether we ever say it out loud that erosion of this culture is happening all the time, right? Like, I mean, so in some form or another, we're probably fighting with all these challenges. How do we get employees to engage with this training? How do we roll this out consistently? Do we have the right resources? Are learners supporting, or sorry, leaders supporting this? Do we even have the means to show that we've accomplished anything? All of that is chipping away at the learning culture that we're trying to shape. Because while we often talk about building learning culture, that choice of words can obscure the culture that already exists. So it's less about kind of building something from nothing out of the ether and more about taking the clay that you already have, and some of it might be a bit mangled and ugly, and molding it into something that is functional and can actually be useful for employees. All right, where are we on time? Not terrible. So let's talk about the intersection of culture and change, where these two things mush together. So like Bruce said in the last session, the pace at which these things happen is faster than traditional training can keep up with. And it's not always something that's sort of, an external factor out there in the world or in the market that is being imposed upon the organization. Some of this stuff we're running into the wood chipper willingly. So whether it's a merger and acquisition, whether it's some sort of new regulation that changes the business, whether something else is going on, there's some restructuring for one reason or another, or rebranding. There's new technology adoption that's going to change a lot of what the business does, or maybe new advancements and innovations. Could be their safety and compliance issues. Either you're trying to be proactive and get ahead of them, or you're being reactive because you had your wrist slapped by a regulatory body. Could be introducing new products and services. That is change. Like it might be exciting and everybody might be happy about it, but there's a lot of things that it can knock around in terms of, how do managers feel about training on whatever the new product or service is? How do, and on and on. Could be competitive pressures. What are competitors in the market doing? Could just be socio-cultural trends, like is everybody quiet quitting or job hugging or like whatever the term du jour is now. Um, like what's going on with employees, how might that affect their willingness to engage with training? So where change comes from can be, a combination of several of these things, can just be one of them kind of coming really hard. Um, but but whether it's by choice or we're sort of forced into it, again, the pace of this is happening a lot quicker than it has in past decades. And so if we're using old models and old ways of doing things, the the likelihood we're going to fall behind is quicker, or higher. Sorry, not quicker. All right. And so to me, this is what I think the key is, right? Is being forewarned and forearmed. Right. So for 61% of organizations, it's a little less than two-thirds, consider these two things together. They look at ch planned changes or changes that are coming up around the bend and say, how is this going to impact our culture? What do we need to do to change it? Or what do we need to be aware of and keep our thumb on? Right. And so 61%, it's better than half. But if we pull back a little, what's going on in that 38% of moderately agrees, the green bar? I mean, really, it's only about a quarter that are nailing it. And we'd all really like to believe that we fall in that 23% on the purple bar. But do we really, right? Because as we're going to discuss, the extent to which we're forearmed or forewarned or just saying, trying to anticipate this makes a difference, right? Like, yes, there's unpredictability and change. It's a feature, not a bug. Like, are we going to be able to predict everything that happens? Of course not. Of course not. right? And the magic word here too is anticipate, not predict, not calculate, not forecast, right? Like you can't map this out like it's ROI, but you can anticipate what's coming and try to bail water out of the bottom of the boat. So when it turns out you're not sinking after all, the next steps you're making are dry from the beginning, right? So it's kind of understanding that a strategy will guide the tactics that get used to get you through change. And this learning culture thing we've been discussing is more or less that strategy. So what we're going to do in slides that follow is compare. We're going to go back and look at some of the charts that we've already seen, but we're going to compare the organizations here in the purple. So those that are leaning into, all right, change is coming. What is this going to do to our culture? We're going to compare those to everybody that's in the gray. So those that are basically ignoring this coming. Um, Before we get to that, though, I did want to spend a minute and talk about, I think, why learning culture is so hard. And and to me, the easiest way to kind of think through this is what's called second and third order effects. This idea comes from systems thinking, got popularized by the military in the late 20th century. I don't know if they're still in the chat. Ava and Melody brought it up in the chat during the last session about systems thinking. But the idea here is kind of first order effects, which is that's what we deal with, but then the sneaky second and third order effects. So the first order effect is the direct, somewhat predictable consequences of something we might do. Second order is what happens indirectly, but we still might be able to to figure out some of it is coming. And then third order is all the compounding consequences that can be difficult, if not impossible, to see coming. So an example is a first order effect might be there's a new regulation that governs the training for topic X at your companies. Um, so the second order effect might be those new regulations or integrations, whatever they are, demand procedural alignment between employees, and so gradually what gets emphasized is getting things right, or getting things right in the new order rather than experimenting. So when we need to get it right, how much learning is going on? I mean, kind of harkening back to the idea of psychological safety that we brought up a few times. Do employees feel safe to learn if the vibes are saying, there's no room for mistakes right now. Like this is whatever this season is, and we got to get through it. The third order effect, of that kind of indirect effect is that when those slowdowns persist, the organization kind of quietly loses depth. Like so, its bench strength gets usurped. The problem solving agility starts to go away. Domain expertise gets eroded. And all of that compounds over time. So just trying to make what you thought initially was a good pivot to address a new regulation can have all these cascading effects that like when we get to the end, we might look backwards and be like, what happened? We tried to do the right stuff. Um, and that's kind of the idea. Learning culture is hard because it's about trying to anticipate what's coming around the bend, kind of based on the problems that you have now. So, so kind of going deeper into this, comparing organizations that consider culture and change versus those that ignore it. Here we're looking at the factors that these organizations feel are important to sustaining culture. And the main point is that these two groups, they don't agree everywhere. Like manager reinforcement, employee engagement, sure, those are no-brainers. Yeah, everybody has those problems. But the gaps are telling in both directions. I mean, the first one at the top, direct access to training. To those that are ignoring the impact of change on culture, employee engagement is number one. Like, we need, these employees got to just get to it and engage with it. And those that are anticipating it are making sure that, well, yeah, they got to engage with it, but they have to be able to access it first. That's a low hurdle. You solve access, you still haven't solved anything else, but if you don't solve access, then a lot of other things can hurt, and a lot of other things can happen. Um, but I think a great contrast to look at the difference in mindset, of the approach to learning culture is about midway down, leadership buy-in, pardon me, versus alignment with business goals, right? Like, what does this tell us about the likely practices, values, and processes going on in these organizations? So those that ignore the impact of change on culture, they're very much worried about leadership buy-in more than those that are trying to look in the crystal ball. Those that are taking a more strategic approach are more worried about, is this aligned with learning, or is our learning aligned with business goals or not? So those two things are related, but are different problems. So I think that this chart gives a peek into the mindset of, for those that are ignoring it, like where are they over rotating, and for those that are anticipating it, what are the things that they're keeping their eye on, more or less. Um, And kind of harkening back to the earlier charts here, where it's same response. We're only looking at agreement ratings though. So if I don't know if anybody else remembers, when we're looking at these charts, most of these there were north of 50% of the entire sample agreeing. Some of them were as high as like 70%. So here we're just looking at the people that agreed and saying how many of them fall into either of these camps. And as you can kind of see just by how much purple there is on the screen, those that consider changing culture together, the impacts that they have, on employees and on organizations as well, a lot more pronounced. So for those that, I mean, for instance, just on this slide, for those that consider changing culture together, 93% of those organizations say, like, yes, the vibe is we convey confidence that our employees can do well in training. Like that's what we're pushing out there. And it's only 40% of those that are ignoring the change. So I think between these two slides, like, is it worth trying to anticipate the you know how change might impact the learning culture? Pardon me. These two charts say, yeah, it is. It matters to the employees. It matters to the organization. Um, it also matters to the challenges that the organization experiences. Here we're looking at the same split, on the most common challenges to culture. And as you can see, I mean, I think with one exception, or no, two exceptions, those that ignore the impact of change are endorsing these at higher, frequencies. And the averages are different. So for those that consider the impact, they're picking about three of these on average, and for those that are ignoring it, they're picking four. And as you can see on the chart, what they're picking is different, or what they experience as a challenge to their culture is not always the same thing. Taking it a step further, again, looking at the same split in the data, like why do change initiatives fail? Um, and as I tried to underline on the chart, one of the reasons is because just the organization doesn't really address any obstacles related to culture with change. Um, and you see it kind of borne out, precisely in the data. Those that ignore this finger that as or identify that as a reason a lot more frequently than those that are at least making the attempt to kind of cross the streams together. I mean, number one challenge is just failing to communicate what's expected. I mean, that holds true, I think, no matter how I look at the data. But here you get a picture of why do these failures happen? And if you've tried to anticipate, how these changes might affect things, they're less likely to fail, right? Now, it doesn't mean the blind spots are different, right? Like outside of kind of 2 points of convergence, like the remainder are mostly about magnitude. So it's not that those organizations that try to anticipate change just get to sidestep all this stuff entirely. It's really just a matter of they're probably that much more likely to catch it. Um, I'm not done with the splits. There's only two more, I promise. So again, looking at like components of culture and change. Um, so the numbers we're looking at here, kind of going back to that Tracy and Two's framework at the start with managerial support, job support, and organizational support. Well, they have a measurement tool for that. I administered that measurement tool to, to these 360 odd organizations. And when you split them out based on whether they consider culture and change together or ignore that, the averages are markedly different. I mean, just for instance, on managerial support, the overall average was like 3.5 on a 5-point scale, so more or less kind of in the neutral middle. But you split it out like this, and you get a very pronounced difference, between those that are considering changing culture together have that much more support, you know, managers' roles and the organization at large compared to those that are ignoring these, the machinery. So kind of what does this say about change and learning culture? What does this say about the impact of post-change training? Like if you've ignored the impact of change on culture, how effective is your training going to be on the back end when managers don't support it as much, when the organization doesn't support it as much? And that's what the employee feels. That's what they understand the reality is of them at work, their opportunities for growth. And to cap it off, here's the knock-on effect of what happens to those organizations that lean into this. They tend to have a lot more effective training, right? Now, let's not gloss over the 16% in the purple on the left side that still take the shot and clearly miss because their training still isn't all that effective. Um, that said, the odds are still much, much better. So maybe one way to look at it is like, do you want to give yourself an 8% chance of completely failing, by trying to consider changing culture together and yet your training is still very ineffective? Or do you only want to give yourself an 8% chance of succeeding? That if you ignore this intersection, according to this data, only 8% of those companies still manage to have effective training. So it's like which end of this continuum would you rather the enterprise fall on? All right, so that brings us to the fourth and final section. While I have a few minutes left, did we learn anything, right? Because we're not here for a blizzard of charts and a lot of purple photos, even though that was a lot of what we were looking at. We're here for something about whether proactive change management relates to fewer cultural challenges and greater success, right? And hopefully you agree that the data we've been looking at tells that story, that being proactive about change and its impact on culture results in fewer challenges, results in better outcomes, results in better training down the line. Right? So the takeaways, hopefully, that you agree with them, are one, that we need to identify and understand these three different culture levels that we have the ability to pull to varying degrees. So the managerial support for training, the job or role support for training, as well as the organizational support. Next one is that, we need to invest in meeting learning demands, not just supply. Standardize where we can so things are consistent, and just try to find some of the right endpoints so that what we're measuring is directing behavior in the way that we want. Um, we need to make the attempt to anticipate the impacts of plan changes on culture. And if we get it wrong, just readjust, retry, run at it again. And then lastly, to try to build and reinforce the narrative that you want to have about learning culture, right? Like the meaning making that Bruce and Liz were talking about in the last session, like we, L&D, needs to fill in the gaps in this story of learning culture and take control of the narrative, at least in the places where we can control it, right? Like, so if we aren't trying to push a narrative of a positive culture of continuous learning and employee growth, it's not just going to happen by itself by accident. Um, and that brings us to the last slide of the presentation. Which it's the same bitter truth as before, but kind of redone. We have a learning culture whether we want it or not, but we can alter it for the better, right? It's not an immovable object, but neither are we an unstoppable force, at least most days. So let's get unstopped, because even if things are changing around us, we can still move the learning culture in the right directions. And the other thing I think is important is like, you don't need permission. Like, you don't need stakeholder permission to shape the learning culture for the better. There's nothing to wait for to take next steps. Yes, there are some things that you can't influence without stakeholder permission, but there's a lot that we can do in L&D to have a positive impact on learning culture. And we can do it this afternoon. We can do it tomorrow. It's not gonna we're not gonna be shut down. All right, and to close off real quick, this session was sponsored by Udemy. This is a snapshot of what happens when I type in learning culture inside my login in the tool. There are things there, and you can mix and match the courses together. So a lot of good stuff there. Also, the data that we've been looking at in today came out of two ebooks that training industry has. Um, so I kind of I mushed these two things together and brought you today's slides. And with that, thank you for listening. I'm sorry I ran us to the end of time. Please direct all argumentative rants to the goober on the screen. And thank you for your attention.
Yes, no, you're gonna have to read the chat afterwards. It was really exciting. And we are out of time, although I was gonna say there were a few people revolting to keep this going, to have the conversations going. But I did want to call out the fact that Chris, or not Chris specifically, there were a couple questions, but a lot of people never even heard of the term learning culture before, and just like your whole kind of beginning slide elements, and they thought it was really cool and are doing even more research. So I just wanted to
Great.
hear that. It was really cool. But thank you, Tom. This was a great conversation. Thank you for the audience as well. There were tons of resources. So I did humbly drop your ebook as well. So excited to
Cool.
see all of those comments and questions. Totally reach out to Tom if you need anything.
Yep.
But we do, unfortunately, I know, Valerie, we do have to end this session, but more excuse to go over to our next friends and watch their session. So we will be taking a 15-minute break to rest those fingers so we can type again in 15 minutes. So up next, we do have Jordan and Kwanzaa, who is joining us from ROI training for their session, Strategies That Turn Learning into Daily Practice. So again, in a moment, I'm going to end this session. You can join our next session by returning to the event lobby and going to the session tab. Please stick around for our next session, which will begin in the top of the hour. I will see you all very soon. Bye.